All right, good morning. So Mark, thanks for agreeing to this. So I know Strava because I'm a tech reporter and I follow a bunch of VCs and tech entrepreneurs on Twitter. And so a few years back, I would see them posting their 38-mile bike rides through the hills of Marin and making me feel like crap on weekends when I was sitting home drinking coffee. So that's how I know Strava. How should we be thinking about Strava now? What's been sort of the evolution over the last few years? Just talk about some of the applications of it.
Yeah, happy to. Strava, 8-year-old company, founded in 2009, and you're right, if you go back to our earliest days, we focused on a very specific market, the passionate cyclist, creating applications both on the web and on the mobile phones to just enrich their experience, let them relive their rides. You fast forward now 8 years later, we're a company, as was mentioned earlier, we add 1 million athletes worldwide every 30 to 45 days across a plethora of sports, probably 32, I think it's 34 sports today that we support. And they're engaged on Strava for all kinds of reasons, from tracking and logging their activities to competing with one another to discovering new opportunities, participating in events. So it's really become the home for their athletic life for our member.
So Strava is the app. So they're using various devices that connect to Strava. Strava sits on the devices. What's sort of the scope of devices and what is that, the relationship there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we have, if you think about Strava almost as a platform, we took a strategy early on to be Switzerland. And what I mean by that is someone's going to go and track their activities, whether it's a ride or a run or a surf session or a day on the ski slopes, any number of ways, oftentimes with a Garmin device on the wrist, or maybe it's your Apple Watch. So today we support probably in the neighborhood of 300 different devices. It could be a Fitbit, Apple Watch. They send that data into Strava. We make that as easy as possible. And then that's where the magic can happen. That's where we can allow them to share those activities, see how they're trending, all the various analytics.
And so how heavily does that usage, 300 devices, but how heavily is it top heavy? Or how much is it top heavy? How much is it Apple, Fitbit, and,
there's a long tail of device manufacturers out there. We continue to see amazing innovation, even Kickstarter devices that seem to show up every week that we try to support. It is dominated by a couple of key players, particularly in the athletic marketplace. So folks like Garmin, Fitbit, Apple has come on strong, as everybody knows, particularly with their latest release.
Is it possible to give kind of a rough percentage of?
Oh, I would guess of the. It's interesting. We disclose so few numbers. I would say today, amongst our population, between Garmin and Fitbit, those are the dominant players that probably represent easily the majority of the activities coming in.
And so what is the scope of data that's being collected from the various activities?
Oh gosh, I think we just announced we've done, in the last 8 years, we have somewhere north of between 10 and 20 billion activities on Strava. If you look, we're a global organization. 83% of our members are even outside the United States. So you're seeing activities of all kinds, every continent, every country in the world.
But I guess are people using it for, like, the primary uses, heart rate, tracking their, creating a baseline and seeing their performance improvements?
That's right. The base level that everybody uses is really GPS. That was the main reason that Strava even exists today, is that with easy access to GPS and being able to actually track where they went, how far they went, how high they went, at what speed, and so forth. Capturing all that was that first piece of feedback. And as the devices became more sophisticated, you're right, now we've quickly become probably one of the largest companies in the world in terms of a data store of heart rate information and other physiology data. What's really fun about that is it's less about how much data we can collect, but the way in which we can bring context to it. Once you have all that data in one place, you can begin to create stories that weren't possible before.
And where does the money come from? Who's paying for it?
So we have 3 sources of revenue. Our bulk of our revenue comes from our freemium model. So there's a premium subscription that's available to our athletes, although you can use the vast majority of Strava for free, but there is a premium upgrade. And then we have 2 others. We also derive revenue through marketing partnerships, sponsors. The industry now has begun to come on board Strava as a platform. And we have an insights business. We have a business we launched with something 3 years ago called Strava Metro, where we actually aggregate our data for major cities around the world and work with city planners and local governments to help them rethink all of their urban infrastructure when it comes to bicycle pathways and pedestrian infrastructure.
And what about have you thought of, or to what degree have you thought of going the corporate and insurance route, incentivizing use and getting companies to sort of pay based on how effective that is?
Yeah, we've seen a number of companies in the health and fitness space go down that path. We're very clear who our customer is. Our customer is our athlete. It's the person who's decided to be active. They're into their fitness and so forth. The challenge when we've talked to corporations is that they're often hoping that they can drive behavior change inside the organization by either creating incentives or having everybody wear a Fitbit. We just find that doesn't work very well. You have to.
Did you test that and find it doesn't work?
Oh yeah, no, we've talked to a number of companies. So our thesis at Strava has been, rather than trying to convince somebody to go do something that they otherwise wouldn't, let's support those people who have already decided they're going to be active, they're going to have fun. Over time, what we've seen is then companies have latched on to Strava as a platform, created clubs there, created opportunities for those employee bases to grow on Strava, but to do it organically rather than push it on them.
A lot of reporting, some from us, on the Apple Watch and the current and future uses of Apple Watch, from things like glucose monitoring all the way up to, could it be, is there a way where you could have prescriptions on the device, prescriptive practices. How do you view that, the future of the watch, and is that, how central is that to kind of the future of what you're doing in the future of connected devices?
Yeah, again, we've been huge fans of the innovation that's taking place on the hardware side, and Apple's right out there in front, there's no question. It took them a while. We've been with them from day one as an early partner, even on the first iteration of the watch, and before it was, when it was tethered to the phone, it provided some challenges for someone who's being active. But from our standpoint, we feel like they're just scratching the surface. And the idea being that if they can create that hardware platform, figure out what data is of relevance to people. I think that's the major question isn't, can we capture glucose? It's, what does somebody do with that information? It's pretty complex. Just trying to educate consumers around what's relevant and not, and how to use the information in a way to somehow improve their life. That's the challenge that we're excited about. How do we take all that data that comes in from an Apple Watch or from another third-party device and actually make sense of it so that it's something that they can use effectively?
So how much of a head start do you get, or how much knowledge you get about what they're working on so that you can start to build applications relative to where the hardware is and is going to be?
Yeah, that's a good example of an evolution that Strava's been fortunate to go through. If you go back to our earliest days, we could not get any insight from anybody, and we kept trying to explain to them that we're Switzerland, we can be a great partner. You fast forward today, I think they understand sort of the role that we play in the ecosystem, and so we get great first access and can really help them iterate on what is relevant to, at least in our case, that fit consumer, and what they need going forward, and at least having some influence.
So you have better relationships within the company. Has that been formed because they've just seen the adoption of the app?
Yeah, I think that we've been fortunate. We've obviously done well, and sort of just a very specific market around a fit consumer, which they considered important. If you talk about Apple specifically, I think that they appreciated, as the watch iterated, the use case became very clear around sort of fitness and active living and so forth, and we were one of those key partners there.
Yeah, so Apple's obviously one of the giant ecosystem companies that you pay attention to. We live in a world of giant ecosystems in tech, or more broadly even, but certainly Facebook, Amazon, Google. Which ones are most important to you, and how do you, what kinds of relationships do you have with those various players?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm stating the obvious. We just mentioned Apple being critical. Anybody who derives their business off an app ecosystem, in the case of Strava, understanding what their roadmap is and how we can support that effectively has been important. Google's the other major player. I mean, for us, everything is Android and iOS. That's where we live, and so it starts there with that base platform. And what happens is we develop stronger and stronger relationships. Case in point, if you think about that data I just talked about with Strava Metro and the business of really helping city planners, well, that's a base layer on a map that begins to be very insightful in terms of if you take that same information, but now you layer it in, for instance, with, let's say, what happens on Uber's base layer and what they see in terms of their own traffic patterns. So those are the kinds of things that we get excited about as we've had more and more data come into Strava, that we can begin to have a different kind of relationship than just the developer on a platform.
And then within the Android ecosystem, do you have to work with both Google and the manufacturers, or is it primarily just Google?
It is far more challenging because in terms of Android Wear, you're exactly right. We're working with both the hardware manufacturer as well as Google themselves to understand sort of what the nuances are there.
What are the important nuances?
Just because a particular device says that it's going to run a particular version of Wear doesn't mean it will perform in the same way that another device will, depending on what the GPS chipset is or the heart rate chipset or whatever actual hardware choices they make. In the case of a fit consumer, data accuracy is critical. So if we can't baseline and give a consistent sort of report back to those individuals, we're in trouble. So we're much more cautious in terms of what device we'll ultimately support to ensure that we can maintain that accuracy.
Where does your data sit if I'm a Strava user collecting data and interfacing with the app for swims and bike rides and runs? Where does all that data sit?
So we're partnered with AWS. So if that's the question that you're asking. Yeah. So that's it rides in that server farm, so to speak. And then there's all kinds of, you get into the notion of sort of how we think about privacy and so forth, then there's all sorts of privacy layers that we build into it. It's a common question we get.
What are the most common concerns there? I guess some of them are obvious, certainly if to the degree that my health changes and it shows up somehow in my Strava app.
It's whether it's your health information or even your location information. If somebody's going out and doing a run from their home, or they're doing something consistent, and you can see that via Strava, that can be a challenge. So, in the case of the feature development we do, we think about choice. We think about how do we give our consumer the choice whether they want to be completely open and transparent about their activities and what they're doing and their own health, or they want to be completely private. And they can do both on Strava. They can lock everything down and only they have access to that information and nobody else does, but that's going to limit their experience on the platform. Well, I'll give you a perfect example. One of the fun things on Strava is that you can compete with other people. You can go out and if you do a ride, let's say you ride here in the Bay Area, you might go up something called Hawk Hill, which is on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, the fun thing about Strava is as soon as you finish that ride, we'll not only tell you how you did on Hawk Hill and how you did compared to your last ride, but we'll tell you how you did compared to anybody else who ever rode on Hawk Hill. So it's a way of just social competition. It's just one form of motivation. But if you want to lock everything down privately, then clearly we can't have you involved in that type of stuff.
So if I'm posting my rides on Twitter and Facebook, what sort of access do those platforms have to being able to advertise against any of what I'm posting? What are they on the ad platform side? What are they seeing, and is that data valuable to them? I'm not sure I understand the question. If I posted a Strava activity to my Facebook account or something like that, is that data that's useful to them somehow?
Yeah, I suppose it would be. I don't know that we've dug into sort of how they're utilizing a share that we make or that our members would make to one of the other more broad spectrum social platforms. But in a sense, you are getting a sense of just physical activity, and we can see sort of from an advertising standpoint, sort of the demographics around that community are very compelling. If you just look at everything from standard of living to educational background and so forth. So I wouldn't put it past the likes of Facebook to have algorithms that are figuring that kind of stuff out. And if you're a Strava member, you have the choice of whether you want to share that information to the other social media platforms or not.
So on the hardware side, it's been a challenge for companies not named Apple and Google ecosystem players. Fitbit struggled on the public markets. Jawbone we know what's happened there. Pebble was acquired for a penny. And a lot of that is due to just how do you compete with Apple? So I get that you're a software play, but what's fundamentally how do you tell that story differently? And I guess I'm going into how do you see your future in the capital markets?
Let me give you two examples. One, I think again, I don't want to put anybody under the bus because we love all those hardware manufacturers. But what they've done in many ways is to develop a commodity. I mean, tracking is not where the strategic advantage is. It is the data behind the tracking that becomes so important. In Strava's case, by being in Switzerland, we've managed to, I'd say two things. one, we've been able to access data from pipes all over the world, from all the various sources. Two, we've been, frankly, maniacally focused on one particular type of consumer, that fit consumer, whether it's somebody who's literally setting a record up Everest or achieving a gold medal in the Olympics, or somebody who's trying to lose 10 pounds and do their first 5K. We've got this beautiful community that's focused on the fit consumer, which allows us an intimate relationship and a long-term value with them. The other thing that's happened on Strava is because we had access to all that data, we created a platform. So I'll give you one case in point. We opened our API about 4 years ago. Over the last 4 years, we've now accumulated over 30,000 API partners, development partners, that are creating different kinds of experiences out of this information that's directly on Strava. So it's not that we're creating a moat necessarily, but we've created this ecosystem that allows us sort of long-term value back to our members, back to our athletes.
So you've been around since 2009. You've raised, according to CB Insights, $42 million. Higher than that? I think I'm looking at that. Okay, I'll let you take that on. What sort of, how do you think about financing from here, and where's Strava in 3 to 5 years from now?
Yeah. So quick correction. We've raised $70 million to date. Some really 3 or 4 major partners. Early investments from a firm now called Jackson Square Partners, or Jackson Square Ventures. It used to be Sigma, Sequoia Capital behind us, and then our largest shareholder is a group called Madrone Capital. So that's been behind us. They've been fantastic partners to date. And we've been relatively frugal. I mean, it's crazy to say 70 million over an 8-year period is frugal, but we've been proud of what we've been able to do and fund it. It's not yet a profitable company. We're very clear about our strategy to continue to grow this international community. And we anticipate that we'll continue to sort of finance it in an effective way. But it's
privately for the time being?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're having run a public company once before. We're in no rush to be a publicly traded company.
Are you seeing other? To what degree have you seen interesting M&A opportunities, and who's sort of sniffing around?
So our industry was interesting. If you look over the last 18, 24 months, we watched the industry just go through a rapid fire change. And what happened was that the footwear and apparel manufacturers, the Under Armours and the Adidas of the world and ASICS, they all acquired all of these other digital tracking apps, which was fantastic for us because it just opened up this greenfield opportunity where we really are the single independent player. And the irony in doing so was that we thought that many of those companies then would perhaps no longer be potential partners for us. But the opposite's been the case. They've actually come to us, even though they have a digital strategy, they're now partnered, and we're doing all kinds of creative things with those footwear and apparel companies inside Strava. So for us now, we're in a much more exciting place to begin looking at M&A ourselves and seeing opportunities to apply some of the really cool technologies. Even some of our development partners that I mentioned on our API are doing things that are close enough to home to where it probably should be embedded directly in the Strava experience.
Classic entrepreneur answer. All right, time for overrated or underrated, since we're down to 2 minutes here. So overrated or underrated for each of these words. Amazon.
Underrated.
Blockchain.
Overrated.
Wearables.
Underrated.
Facebook.
Ooh. Underrated.
Google.
Overrated.
Doug Jones. Sorry, I just made that one up. But you're welcome to answer.
Underrated.
Alabama's a good state for cycling. Autonomous cars.
Underrated.
Fitbit.
Oh, good partner.
That's a dodge. Uber.
Underrated.
Cybersecurity.
Lack thereof, or?
I just have the word in front of me.
Lots of work to go.
And something I wish I would have asked you about, but I didn't, so we do have 30 seconds. So Tesla.
Underrated.
So quick, 20 seconds on, does Elon Musk have a play in your industry?
Not that I'm aware, but I'm such a Luddite when it comes to anybody else's industry. I haven't seen him in the fitness space, but I suppose, I will say this, his comments around AI and sort of what he's, we look at that space in fitness and think about what AI can do to context and bring information in, and he's in the middle of that, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Great. Mark, thanks a lot.